Hey guys, welcome back to the Paladins Alliance. Excited to be here in 2025, and I kind of wanted to do this power ranking for North America on a whim. I honestly made the decision after seeing all the roster moves and seeing how happy I was with all these moves making sense. And with that, I wanted to bring in our resident NA expert alongside me with Xner and talk about what's going on because honestly, I'm just really excited about how many teams we have in the conversation now, and with how cutthroat the invite system is going to be at this point, it's just going to make it even more fierce. How are you kind of feeling when you saw, after all these Dust 2 reports came out at the end of all of it, Cole?
I'm feeling great. We got a couple new organizations. Maybe we're losing one, to be honest, with nouns, but I'm super excited in terms of some of the roster moves that we're seeing and kind of the words that are being put out about some of the teams that are coming through here. So it's gonna be a good year, and obviously with more slots in the major and things like that, it's just gonna build and build upon it. So all these guys are gonna get more opportunities as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'll start the conversation with Wildcard. And of course, they're the kind of the belle of the ball when we talk about North American teams at this point. Everybody in Europe now all of a sudden thinks this team is great. Oh my God, where did this guy come from? Where did JBA, this JBA guy, he's real, he's good?
J
Oh my
Ba.
God. And okay. My petty grievances aside, I think this team like really showed what they're made of, and I think they kind of surprised me in the sense that like I didn't expect them to make it to through the first stage at all. I was thinking that at best they would like make a 2-2 run and like they would lose 2-3, but I think like every player, whatever they were good at, like increased like 10 to 15% in a crowd stage, which was just insane to see. And like obviously, you got to give so much credit to Stanislaw individually as well. I think he was calling. I think as he usually was because I felt we were seeing
Yeah.
those calls regularly,
Oh
but
yeah.
individually I felt like he was on another level. That being said, where do you feel like you kind of put them in this sphere for right now? When we talk about North American teams moving forward.
I mean, for me, I think you could just go ahead and put him into. I can't actually read what that S tier is, but
Oh, it's
that's the
elite.
top
It's elite. My
elite.
fault.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, elite. I don't know if I put him in elite
Well,
necessarily, considering that,
I'll preface
but
by
I
saying
would put
like
them in the top tier out of these rosters because I
yeah,
think
yeah.
they're
I'm
gonna
saying
be.
like elite North American team. I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
saying
yeah.
like
Okay, I see what you mean.
vitality type stuff
So
though. So
I think for me, wild card obviously had. I think the biggest question of if they could get all of their guys to perform on land. I think that major opportunity was perfect because then you're playing in front
hmm
of a crowd immediately, so you have to deal with that stress. Which I think for like a player like JBA, there was questions. A lot of people were like really concerned about his land performances. I wasn't in that crowd because he's like what, a 20-year-old player
hmm
who's like playing in his first international lands. Yeah, he's going to do bad. Of course he is. Like there's just no question about it. But we finally got to see him take that step up into like a very good land performance, rolling through. Not only when he was playing out in Atlanta not too long ago, but also stepping into this major. And so for me, like you said, off the back of some leadership from Stan, off the back of what feels like a team that's taking a lot of good moves in terms of decision making. We're playing in Europe. They're playing in Europe right now in a finals. Like this roster is just going to get better and better over time, and they're taking all the right steps in taking that direction.
yeah, I really like what they're doing right now. I actually wanted to talk about that tournament a little bit because I think we're kind of getting a good idea of what they want to move towards. They're picking Nuke a lot more now, which is really cool because we saw them like all the way back in Forsaken, and that was when they were like forced to play Nuke, and they actually
Mhm.
looked like incredible on it. And then they like kind of never touched it again, and it was kind of similar on Wildcard where they like would play it if they were forced to, and they would look okay on it. But now I can start to see that they're trying to shift their map pool that way, and I don't mind that at all. I think they're trying to just make more complexions to their like map pool and how they want to approach the game, and they're trying to play in Europe more. Like I don't know. They
I
beat
mean,
Incilio and they beat
yeah,
Sinners, which I think are
the
like
Sinners one's crazy.
yeah. I feel like that there's road bumps, very clear road bumps that they would lose to either one of those teams. That I was honestly very impressed to see that kind of result, even though they're quote unquote expected to with the rankings. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really respect like what Sinners do, and usually this is a roster that always makes deep runs. I think they made a roster change
They
getting
did,
rid of
yeah,
Mike A.
two.
So I mean, I know
Mhm.
that he was a key piece there, but
Yeah.
I will say, like, again, taking steps in the right directions. It's kind of sad to see him drop out of ECL as well. But
Hmm.
to be honest with you, that's the right move as a team that has the availability and the funding to travel over to Europe and just stay there. You can play there
Hmm.
consistently. You can get a lot more tournaments there. You can get better ranking points there. So it just makes a lot of sense that that's what we're going to see out of this team is them taking that step in that direction. And I feel like any roster that really isn't doing that and can is kind of limiting themselves. So
Yeah.
I think Wildcard's making some great moves there.
It is a risk, I will say nowadays. Like I'm interested to see like how this works, where like these teams are going to EU and then playing in like these online cups because technically you would lose a lot of points if you lose to them.
Hmm.
And I mean, obviously the upside is awesome because let's say Wildcard does win this tournament and they do get the ranking points. Like now you're solidifying yourself to get repeated invites beyond like the Kato EPL stuff or the PGL stuff. So things look good for them there in that sense. So there is that risk, the risk and reward, and we'll see what it affects teams like M80 as well. I think they're gonna have
Yeah.
that hard decision to make, and I do respect a lot of them in terms of like dropping out of ECL. Like obviously for us, we're gonna have like worse games to watch, which like you know what, it is what it is. I do think at the end of the day, like it is. I think for the region's benefit, I do want to see this happen more often, just so I don't know. They can learn a little bit, and if they do have qualifiers later on and they come back, that's where you bring that knowledge back over to like other teams, like a Boss or a Nouns maybe that haven't been able to really go out to EU all too often.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I'm really up on this team. They're probably, I mean, barring Liquid, who I think made a good change, and I guess we can talk about them a little later. But like
Hmm.
barring that team, I think they've made the moves that I'm most excited about, and they didn't make any roster changes, right? They just kept the same roster that has been performing,
Hmm.
stepping it up, and I think that's the right direction to go in terms of just taking that last step, and that's to go to Europe, really.
Yeah. Oh, well, let's continue the conversation on Liquid then. I mean, I really was surprised that they cut Yekindar, not necessarily because it's the wrong roster move. I definitely think it's the right one, but just the fact that it happened because I feel like too many times with Liquid where they have a good result and that really extends the lifeline of that iteration. We kind of saw that with Nitro a couple of times where it was like the writing's on the wall. He couldn't frag at that point. He needed to be cut, but he stayed around for like two or three more tournaments, and that's when the kind of juice of that team had died already. And I like that they cut that issue out as soon as possible. Actually, I wouldn't even say soon as possible. It's been an issue for a long time, but at least like relatively sooner than what I would have expected. And they brought in Nerds, which I don't know. I'm actually very curious to see what your take on this move is because it's an unorthodox one, but on paper you just like think about the raise in firepower and you kind of have to get excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you're talking about roll cells and all of that, you really you're not happy. But for me, who's watched a lot of Ints and Nerts and what he was doing on that team in the past, it makes me very excited because on that team at one point, Nurse was super capable of being a very aggressive piece. And when Snappy was calling at his peak and when Snappy was playing at his best with that Ints roster, he was calling some very fast paced, off spawn aggressive movements. That means everyone has to be very forward facing in these fights. So Nurse showed that he had that capability beyond what anyone expected, I think. And that's why a lot of success came through for Ints in terms of what they were able to do despite the roster that they had. I think was the ability of Nerds to step into that role and be very moldable. So for me, I think if you're talking about like a 1-to-1 role transfer, you might be a little concerned, but I also think Nerds can pick up some of that slack very easily. He's still a young player alongside it, so it's not going to be super hard for him to learn these positions, because I think he's been in those positions in the past. So I'm
Mhm.
really looking forward to it. I also think, if you're playing with a guy like Naf, this was a point that we had talked about a little bit, but he's also very moldable. He can transfer into whatever role he needs to be playing in. So Liquid have a luxury in that sense of having players that can kind of fit the mold that they need to.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, right? It's how NAF can react to any situation. I feel like I've seen so many different rosters, and I've seen NAF play different roles in every single one of them, and he's done. I mean, you look at the numbers. Like this guy is just an absolute stud, no matter what it is, just because he has the flexibility in him to kind of adapt and evolve. I think JKS also has been taking a lot of openings, which has been really good, or at
Yeah.
least more than he used to, which was a big issue. Honestly, was probably why he got cut from G2, is that he was just too passive and he wasn't able to really provide as much on the offensive as they would have liked. It was very much like, Nico having to entry a lot of times, and that didn't necessarily work all too much. But yeah, I think if he can improve that, and I think there's still a lot of work to do for Ultimate. I think that this is going to be a very test heavy kind of season for him, where he's been figured out at this point. Like, people understand how to counter him very easily. A lot of teams don't like to take those opening gambits straight away. They kind of wait for Ultimate to have his move, and they kind of play around that. And I'd like to see him kind of like change a little bit, adapt, because I think that a lot of these oppers, these younger oppers, do not have that extra gear to learn after a setback, after a little bit of a slump.
Mhm.
But whether or not he can do that is kind of the test as to whether or not he can become an elite opper. Because right now, I think he's just bang average, and that's kind of
Yeah.
like my main issue with the team. I don't know how you feel about Ultimate, but that's kind of how I perceive it.
I mean, I think the point that you highlight there most of all is getting back into that very exciting form that he was able to bring to the table when he first joined this roster, when he was, having pop off performances and overtimes and bringing Liquid a lot of energy and a lot of excitement. When we were concerned that Ultimate was not going to be the pick long term for this team, and I think he can be, but like you said, being able to constantly innovate your game as an opera is something so difficult. He got figured out a little bit quicker than I think Liquid and he would have hoped. Now I think a lot of people are used to the way that he plays, and it's definitely taking a toll on Liquid in terms of how they start off rounds, how they set him up. So for him, I think that next step is for sure being able to innovate, but that's not an easy job at all. They just got to figure that out quickly because he's kind of running a little bit out of time. Not out of time. I think he's going to be more stable in this roster.
Hmm.
But I just feel like for him, that innovation factor needs to come through here in 2025. Whether it's he gets support, whether that's like a coaching thing to give him ideas on how to set up rounds. But that's going to be the biggest task is being able to build upon that.
I think a lot of people have been kind of questioning the IGL aspect, the IGL coach aspect of this team, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna be completely honest. I'm still very sold on Twist IGLing. I think a lot of people were calling for Hooksy, calling for Glaive, and saying maybe they could have removed JKS and added in an IGL. I really think that this Twist concept is a good one. I think it's something that is going to be difficult for Liquid moving forward in terms of like the growing pains right now. But you look at the floor of this team. The floor of this team is making playoffs and losing to like FaZe, Navi, and G2, or maybe
Hmm.
Vitality in there as well. These teams are like top four, right? Like these teams are
Yeah.
contending for trophies every tournament, and you don't have that extra oomph to get it over the top. And I don't necessarily think it's a captaincy thing. I think this guy is a bona fide leader. I can tell by the way he carries himself in these interviews, in how he like treats his teammates, that he's definitely equipped for it mentally, which I think is one of the hardest things to do in esports right now, just to be that bona fide leader. And then second of all, I think that he's got some great ideas off of spawn. I think it's really the question of like how he handles like mid to late round situations in like pressure scenarios. And that's kind of where I think you just need to give him time, where he needs to be through so many of these cases that eventually he finds his own identity. He finally figures out what he wants to be as an in-game leader, instead of trying to kind of be like a copycat in a ways. Like I remember
Hmm.
like when he would play FaZe. I mean, the reason why I think Kerrigan has his number is I think that Twist tries to do too much. He tries to make a Kerrigan call, and it fails like right in front of him because it's not him, it's not his identity of
Mhm.
around, and that's where I think Kerrigan's Kerrigan, and Twist still has a way to get up there. But I'm still like not I'm not like out on the idea yet. I don't know about you.
No, I'm not at all. I was never really out on the idea that Twist could IGL. I mean, as you highlighted, he's learned from the best, so there's no question that with time he's going to get better and better. I will kind of look towards the coaching aspect because, again,
Uh-huh.
as I highlighted, I think it's kind of not necessarily fully on Mither's shoulders, but I would like to see him, provide some extra support there and some extra help for Opera and individual and ultimate. So I'd like to see more cohesion in that department. But for Twist, I was never really in that camp of this team needs an IGL because I feel like he's been able to show enough work and consistency versus any team that maybe isn't top five. When you talk about playing the elite, that's where I think he needs the help, but also that's where I think experience is going to be the biggest difference maker. Give him a year or two more as a leader, as an IGL, and I think he's going to be handling business versus top five teams in a more consistent fashion than what he's been able to do last year. And already, I think you're seeing a lot of growth in that department.
Yeah, and I think I didn't actually like talk about the Nerds move at all, but honestly, I'm really excited for it. I want this move to succeed purely off the basis of I want to see a team with like five experienced players, or I should say four, just learn to adapt to this situation and showcase like roles are important. Yes, I mean we can see where it doesn't work with teams like Astralis where they've been trying to really kind of take square pegs and fit them in round
Yeah.
holes, and it's just not working. But on Liquid, I want to see it work where these players just learn how to just survive and figure it out. And I think they're all capable of doing it, just considering how dynamic a couple of their key pieces are. So yeah, I'm pretty high on it. I think originally I was like questioning it a lot. But the more that I kind of sit on it and think about it, I have a lot of faith in Twist being able to adapt his role as well, maybe trying to take a little bit more of openings in his regard, and then also Naf kind of moving forward,
Yeah.
changing his role up a little bit. But yeah, I still think like I very firmly like put them ahead of Wildcard. I don't think it's really
Yeah.
very close in that regard. But yeah, very curious to see how they do. I think this team kind of goes beyond the tier list. They're kind of not really in this realm whatsoever. It's more that I'm just excited to see and talk about that move a little bit more. A team that's completely not in that realm, Undone. At the recent Fragment, the only reason why I put this team on here is because I was actually very excited to just see all of these old players in Steel trying to make it work, and it sounded like they were kind of taking it semi-seriously with the scrims that they had.
Yeah.
I know Sixy was talking about how much they wanted to play together, but obviously Sixy's not there anymore. So I just put them in there. I guess we'd put them on DOA, but they'll be playing in ECL, so I don't know.
I mean, I would be a little bit more nice and say they need to work. I mean,
Hmm.
for me again, I think that motivation might take a small hit, but you're also dealing with Steele, who even when he loses some of the best players that he's had and played with, I feel like he can still find pieces, identify talent
True.
super well, and then bring them into, a functioning roster that has that leadership. So for me, I would say they're not completely dead just because they lost a key piece in 60. It does depend a lot, I would say, on like how Skadoodle keeps up his momentum. If he still is interested, because I was hearing, like whispers about him being super motivated at Dallas last year, talking about
Hmm.
how he was starting to get back into the groove of Counter Strike, start to get that competitive drive. But you get that competitive drive when you start playing with a really good roster, you start really clicking as a team. You have this star piece that is so effective and understands the game to a much more modern approach, and then you lose them in 60, that can take a hit on the motivation. So for me, I think Undone are going to be one of the better teams in ECL. There's not a lot of great teams in ECL this
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
So they're going to be one of the better rosters for sure, but it depends on who that fifth piece is. I don't know if you have any ideas, but it depends on who that
Nothing.
fifth piece is going to be replacing 60 and how motivated this team still remains.
Yeah, I think it's such a tough scenario because I think he provides so much juice to this team. Like obviously, Steele is very willing to be aggressive when he needs to be, but players like Sixy are kind of one of one in a lot of ways where they just find ways to break the fundamentals of the game. And I think for an IGL like Steel who wants to play the game by the book, like he's very much a guy that, whether he says it or not, has like a flow chart of how he wants to play around and how he wants to default and call. And I think when you have players like that, I think you need players to bust that concept wide open. You think about this is like a crazy reference. Dignitas way back in the day with MSL. That's a guy that also was very like, I'm going to play the round specifically every single time the same way, and I'm going to have people dry run it 50 times and run it the same way. But then you add in a player like Config who doesn't necessarily fit that mold as much, and that's how you get Dignitas upsetting VP like all the way back in 2016. You know, like you have crazy moments like that because you have players that break the mold. And so I think he's got to really go deep in his bag to find a player like that he can mold like that. I don't know if he can, because I look towards players like Chop and I look to players like MOTM, and I'm saying that these guys, they can make a solid foundation for your team. I think Chop is a pretty good anchor. I think MOTM has improved in a lot of senses ever since C9. He's really gotten into the like kind of time chamber and really like worked on himself, and I do like what he's brought to the table. But I think that they just need that like one piece, and I know it's just one piece, but I don't really know who you go towards, because once again, it's like your like tier list of like kind of acceptance of players going to your team is like lower than boss, which is really hard to deal with. And unless they get wins in ECL, I feel like people aren't going to be like, oh, you know, they're just the old guys on the block. Like, what's the point in going over there? But yeah, I don't know. I really do like that this team is here, and I like that they're all hungry, because I do want Steel to be a competitor. I do want Ska to be a competitor, because I think these guys still have it, especially if they have the motivation to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. That's the biggest kicker, though. They need to be building momentum as opposed to losing it here, and unfortunately, they've lost a little bit of momentum. And I think it's going to come down to how they start off their season in ECL, and those wins don't come easy, and those best of ones, it's a really weird format. So talking about needing to start off well and just build off of that, and whoever they do pick up probably does need to have a little bit of experience, does need to bring a little bit of talent into the mix, and that's not an easy find right now with all of the roster pickups that have been happening. Because if you got the opportunity to go to Undone, it's a great chance. I think any player that you know gets that opportunity, as opposed to like playing with something that you're comfortable with, I would take it. I would take learning and growing with players like Steel and Skadoodle way over trying to just join up with a team like on that same caliber, because you have that chance to grow and a chance to play underneath a well-connected IGL that can I mean just probably has a lot of pull in the scene, I'd imagine.
Yep.
So if you're talking about joining a player and joining a team that can build your career, definitely Undone is probably the place to do it if I'm a player. But it depends on if they can find that gym right now, because there's not a lot of clear picks for them.
I think for me, I'm looking at how much can Chop improve as a player. You talk about improving under good leadership, and I think this guy has been through the ringer for all the roster that he's been through, and I don't think he's improved as much as I wanted him to. And like, you know, they always cut him, and a lot of people, like, you know, you talk about the whole like floppy conversation, and you're like, oh, cut the anchor, and that solves all your problems, very jokingly. And I still think that, like, you know, in those situations, the roster moves kind of made sense, but I still feel like I've seen like flashes of really good play from him, and I think he just needs to have that one good run with the team like this, and hopefully things can improve for him. But I think this Undone team, keep an eye on them. We'll definitely be covering them a lot. So onto TSM, and I think this team came out of nowhere. I kind of want to spend a bit of time to talk about them, because it's a very interesting one. So the supposed roster, this is obviously not confirmed yet, but it's very heavily rumored that this is the roster. It's the IGL will be Vanity. At least I hope so, or I think so. You've got Carson as well. You've got Marky. You've got Dia, and I'm missing the fifth player. Who am I missing?
Darty? Did you say Darty?
Yes, Darty. Yes, Darty. Right, that's right. And yeah, I think that I'm before I jump into it all too much, coL, overarching thoughts on this team.
Uh, I mean, I'm very excited for an organization joining into this roster. I'm very excited for the potential of Vanity getting a team that I think has a lot of good pieces and a lot of good players. Also, an IGL that has a lot of experience playing with teams and getting a lot of, like, I would say, name recognition in the NA scene. It's just my biggest concern here is how he's gonna hop into playing at this level, being that he wasn't just gone for a little while in CS, he's been gone for a long time. So it's going to be one of those massive jumps that Vanity has to hop into, where it's just you have to be ready to play a pretty much a brand new game. First of all, it's a
Hmm.
CS2 now, and I think that's going to be a challenge for him as a player. Is he able to call out of the gates? I'm trying to find his last official played. It was December 6th, 2020, and that was
Oh,
DreamHack Masters Winter North America 2020, where they did win. They came in first place. They beat Team One. They beat but that was the last official that Vanity played. That's now 5 years ago at this point, and it's a completely different game. It's developed. It's grown a lot, and it's just going to be interesting to see how he, after such a long time being away, is able to step in, because it's a lot of trust to give to a player and to an IGL that sure has experience and has like a lot of structure and name value, especially in Valorant. I think he was pretty good in Valorant. I'm not sure, to be honest with you,
I think
but
he was good for a little bit, and then he also
yeah,
kind of just had to coast on a couple rosters there. But yeah.
yeah. So it's like, I mean, yeah, it's a great opportunity. He's just got a lot to prove, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. I'll be blunt about it. I don't know how this guy's gotten this team. Like, I don't.
That's what I'm thinking, right? How did he land this
I don't know
opportunity?
how an org came up and they were like, you know what, I'm gonna pick up Vanity as my IGL, and then second of all, I'm going to get like possibly like the best possible pieces that I could put together that's not on a salaried team right now, and just say, yeah, this is just what I get, and I get an opportunity like this. I think on one hand, it's like you need to have some sort of pull for Vanity to actually join the team. As far as like the brand that he has and like the kind of like like he's such a storied player in Valorant at this point. As small as the history of that game is, he has such a deep part of it in North America that people really like him. So I'm sure for TSM in that sense really like that part of him, that they're getting
Hmm.
a huge market that they can pull from Valorant to maybe CS and maybe kind of move around that way. But beyond that, beyond the business perspective, I'm not gonna lie, I don't think that there was like that much that I was excited about as him as a captain in Counter Strike that makes me believe that this is just going to automatically work.
Hmm.
I'd love for it to work. I'd love for him to have time to develop. I'd love for TSM to give him a chance beyond just Austin. Like I'd like for him not to get dropped, or like this whole team to get dropped after Austin, and whatever the second major of the year is, have a real shot at that. But yeah, as far as Austin is concerned, like I don't know. Like I think they'll probably play like I think they'd probably qualify for like the last chance qualifier or whatever that they have for this cycle, and I think they could scrape through there. But yeah, I think this team is all dependent on team cohesion because on paper, I think honestly, even the Carson move can work. I think
Yeah.
if you have him as an aggro rifler, you take any sort of thought out of him playing in terms of like trying to call or anything. And like you saw what he did on Nouns, like I'm always thinking about how they approached Mirage CT side and like him just being so annoying in mid with
Hmm.
CJ. And I think if you have him just be that type of a player, it could work. Darty is a fairly solid anchor piece, one of the better ones in North America. You've got Dia, who's really turned heads everything that I've seen him play, and he's played pretty up to standard, if not better. And Marky is like criminally underrated in the North American scene. This guy has been an absolute stud for like years. So
Yeah.
obviously, like if I had to think about roster construction, it's technically perfect, I think, in a lot of ways. But it's really the question of how much do you value Vanity out the gates. And the other talking point is their first tournament's going to be ECL, and they're going to have to play ECL with the Timberman crew, the Timberman
Oh
core.
yeah.
They're going to have to play with, I believe, Shane and Dare, which I don't know how I feel about that. Now Vanity's going to have to call a different core for like ECL games, and they're probably going to play in CCT, so they're going to have to call for a different team there. I don't know, because
That's no good. That out of the gates is already a
yeah,
big mess. I mean, again, are they like confirmed for ECL? Because I feel like at that point you just drop out. Because I saw
uh,
like it was TS Imberman or whatever as the name that people were
oh,
calling
is
him
that what it
for.
said?
I don't know if it says that in like the official documents, but like
Uh
also
huh.
it attaches your name as TSM to a couple of players that I don't know if TSM are too interested in attaching their names to. But barring that,
True, true.
barring that, I think what's interesting, like you said, is also another task for Vanity is getting that buy-in from a bunch of players that have been working in that scene for a long time and trying to develop,
Hmm.
build the scene from the ground up, play without organizations. You have to step into this and lead this team, which I think is one of the biggest assets that Vanity probably has. He probably can lead a roster here at least and get that buy-in of these players. It's not going to be easy, and he's got to succeed out of the gates, I think, if he's going to get that buy-in, but that's going to be the biggest test. I think fortunately for him, you can probably lean on a little bit of Carson's ability to call as well. I think
Hmm.
that's a good pickup for them is to ease the transition in for Vanity. Carson, wasn't the best caller in the world, but when facilitated by a guy who can very, collectively and calmly bring out calls like Vanity, I do think there's going to be a good aspect in that department. Also, Carson, I think people are clouded by the way that he match fixed at one point, right? They don't like
Yeah,
him in that sense.
yeah.
He's a good player. Like he just is a very good player and a good competitor now.
Hmm.
So if you look at how he's been playing with I mean most recently like watching him play with the Timberman roster, like he's just tearing things up, man. And like it looked like he cared and he was playing different roles that he had to learn on the fly. He used to play like Kana Mirage, and then he had to play a anchor, which I think is like one of the
Whoa.
hardest transitions
Yeah.
that you can make. It's not easy at all to make the right moves. First best of three that he played was getting blasted, was getting just worked. Played a second series. It was like a second revival series. Completely changed the way he was playing the game in like a couple of weeks. He had learned this role. So that sort of ability to adapt very quickly and then add another element to your game is serious. And that's what I mean. I think Carson is severely underrated, and people have, they have this stigma around him that he just isn't. He doesn't care, but I think at this point that's not the case.
Yeah, I think there were some rumors saying like, oh, maybe he's just a stopgap player at this point. That like they'll play the market and they'll see what happens, and if they don't like the results that they're seeing, that they can kind of remove him if they want to. But I think you're spot on. I think the concept of actually giving Vanity a player to lean on will be interesting, and see if that kind of develops him quicker than expected. But I'm kind of like putting them like originally when I like didn't have the IGL attached to it, I would put this team in like puncher's chance, but I'm kind of like in the meh territory with them
Yeah.
where like I really need to see this team play like multiple series. I need them to see honestly just play the full season of ECL. Like let's see if they can get through that whole Timberman phase. I honestly think they could still win with that team considering just the field that ECL has right now. They'll probably have a couple of bad losses to some top teams, but beyond that, I want to see how this team deals with adversity because there are going to be setbacks with this team, guaranteed. But how are you going to deal with that as a leader, as an org? We'll be very curious to see. But let's move on. Let's move on to M80. I think this team is such a weird one now because for the first time, I feel like they haven't been poached, but they still have a setback with Rec not being able to play on this team for the first little bit. Where are we kind of seeing M80 when we look at this field right now?
I mean, I feel like M80 is heading into 2025 with, like you said, the biggest detail being that they didn't get poached. that this roster gets to hop into a new season playing with their squad and having everyone really buy in to this squad as well. And at this point, that's going to be the biggest asset that a lot of teams don't have the luxury of. I mean, Wildcard's in a pretty similar position, but also like if we're talking about teams with power in the scene, I M80 are probably like that next roster. It might be like a two-horse race with Wildcard and M80 in terms of like buying power at this point and
Hmm.
the ability to keep your players. Unless Liquid wants to come down and dip in and rip one of your guys away, you're not going to really struggle with the idea of like poaching, at least in the NA scene. Maybe internationally that could be a problem, but I kind of doubt that at this point with the players that they have. Malves was a superstar and definitely deserves his chance on G2, but the case that we're seeing out of M80, right, is that I don't think they're really going to have to worry about poaching any longer with the direction that Liquid's taking here with Nerds. That's not really a problem for them. So I think they finally get to put their nose to the grindstone. As you said, a little bit of unfortunate circumstances with Rec and the travel issues. I'm just speculating, but I'd imagine he was hitting the slopes and in the off season, and can't travel now because of it. I think he broke something, but it's good to see M80 in this position where they can just build and take some time to work with this roster and not have to go through any adversity in that sense.
So this team is dropping out of ECL. They're one of three teams, I think, that are dropping out alongside Wildcard and I believe Nouns, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not
Sounds
really
right.
sure. Yeah. Oh, and then Isolos Laser is also dropping out, as far as I know. They're going to stay in Brazil and
And
play there.
Legacy.
Oh, right, correct. Legacy is also dropping out. Yeah, wow. It's hard to like really imagine how the field would be at that point, but hey, we got to roll with the punches. But anyways, yeah, so they're not going to have that opportunity. And I know that like hearing Sicko talk about this team and how like focused they are with trying to play in EU as much as possible, trying to get out there as much as possible. The org is also very aware of that, which I do feel like some orgs that we've had in the past do not understand the importance of something like that. But obviously, it helps that these guys have already qualified for a lot of tournaments, at least in the first little section of the season. So they're going to be out there for a little bit. They've also got a decent stand-in. I think people are really down on Keto, but I think that a lot of those issues came from him having a call on a very dysfunctional team, having never been a caller before. I think, yes, I will 100% agree. He was a terrible caller. I don't think he should have ever done it. I don't think he was accomplished for it, but I think he's good enough to hang in terms of the roles. I think he can kind of match Rec a little bit, but yeah, I think we'll see what they do at Bounty. I have zero expectations. I don't really see them. I actually don't remember who they drew. I think they drew Astralis, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Oh no, that was Wildcard. They drew Face.
Oh, Face, yeah. And I think Sin was saying like he doesn't like that. He thinks that they don't perform in online qualifiers. There's some reason that he gave, but whatever the case is, I think that Elige is going to have a field day with that game. I think they're gonna have a great game plan. So that being said, like Bounty, not really in my mind of like an important tournament. It's really just like how are again, very similar to like the conversation I'm having with TSM. Like how do they deal with like a slow start to the season? Because you're going to have a lot of these invites and you're going to still be dealt a very tough draw because seeding is not going to be favorable for any of these tournaments, I don't think. Especially considering they didn't make the major, right? So they've already like lost a lot of that momentum and then lost like a lot of that like aura or like kind of the aura to them that like they're the best up and coming team within North America. Wildcard's very quickly taken that spot.
Hmm.
So how do they kind of respond with that, even though they've kept their roster? Is like another thing for me. So I think it's up to Lake to prove that he can still keep doing what he's doing. It's up to Sin to still have a fresh calling. I think that he's really impressed me as a caller. I think that he's still like really done a good job in terms of how he likes to approach mid rounds, and individually he's still like I think one of the best like fragging IGLs in like the top 30 right now. So super important to have him with his head in the right place. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of see them at like the bottom end of elite, like top end of puncher's chance.
Hmm.
And I hope that I hope I see just more of them in EU, and it all comes down to, can they withstand the invite pressure that they have at these tournaments, and if not, then they're gonna have to regroup in NA, and they kind of have no choice.
Yeah. I mean, they're in a tough spot, I think, out of the gates with the way that they're starting off this season. No, I think Greg is a really crucial piece to this team. He does play some very difficult spots there and is trusted with a lot. He's very active. I think he's a bit of a special player in that sense, and
Yeah.
it means that they are losing out on a key piece. But like you said, I think Keto can do a decent enough job at trying to as best as can fill that position. It's just it is going to start them off a little bit slower than they liked. I'm interested to see that phase pick. I think when I was watching some of the Blast Bounty videos about it, he had said, they only picked it because, first of all, the bounty's like, it's pretty nice. But second of all, you're also, they talked about the historical struggles of like phase in online qualifiers. So it's pretty funny there that they targeted this team that I think is going to be pretty deadly, but we'll see how things work out. And I don't think they really have a lot to lose hopping into Blast Bounty, considering they are playing with a stand-in. But yeah, those slow starts here and playing in tournaments and struggling if you're going out last, things like that are not going to do them any favors. So like you said, with the risk taking that wild card are doing and playing in some of the international events and challenging themselves with these positions, they've got to prove it just the same way. And that's not an easy task given that you have that stand-in situation. They have some mental battles that I think they have to overcome, where sometimes I think they hop into these games. We saw it when we were casting Thunderpick, actually, where
Yeah.
they kind of lean on some comfort. They don't really. What I think Stanislaw does is I think he's always pressing and innovating and foot to the floor when it comes down to the strategy and the tactics that this roster builds. Whereas sometimes I think M80 hop into an event, especially after what they did at Pro League, where they had a lot of confidence, they impressed a lot, and they asserted themselves. We see them hop into some of these extra or at like end of the year international events where their foot's off the gas. I felt like in a big way. They lacked innovation and imagination on Anubis. They struggled in their map pool and entirely. And those sort of problems have to be avoided here in 2025 because it has to be hard work here for this team to catch up to wildcard. I think wildcard, like you said, have completely overtaken them, and that's not a position that you want to be as an organization, nor do you want to be in that position. You don't want to be number 2 to Liquid right now, I don't think, and I think they're
Mm.
number 3 right now.
We're very curious to see how they adapt, but we'll move on to NRG, who honestly, I think they've made the best possible roster move that they could have done in the current climate. They've removed Automatic and they've added George. And I think a lot of the EU folk out there didn't like this move. They said, you remove Automatic, why would you do that? But frankly, I think his time had very clearly passed. I don't necessarily know if it's a motivation thing or if it's a mechanical thing or like if he's too old. I think it's probably a combination of all of those. But honestly, it just looked like he was given all the keys to the castle and he just couldn't capitalize.
Yes.
Given like just prime star roles, just couldn't figure out how to play in the late round, no matter who the caller was, whether it was Walco, whether it was Nitro. And I really do have to commend Daps for saying, look, we've got to let him off into the sunset and try to take a chance on somebody young, because you've already got enough of a base of veterancy on this team. You got to get some firepower to back that up. And you've got Hexed, which is great. And now you add in George into that conversation, and I'm honestly loving it. I mean, we've seen what he's capable of on land. We've able to see what he can do when he is given all this space. And I'm just so excited about this team, especially with Nitro leading and molding this guy.
Yeah, I mean the
Oop, 1 second. I think you cut out here. Hold on. It's you? Alright. I still can't hear you. Hold on. Maybe is it the Discord call? Is it you? Okay.
hello. There we are.
Yeah, there we go.
Feedback.
There we go.
Yeah,
Nice.
I mean the I was saying the narrative on this team for the longest time was like Breeze has to go, he needs to be removed, and I was kind of tired of hearing that, given that Breeze was like he was taking some really rough roles. He was doing good in them, having these great performances. Whereas watching, like you said, automatic get a lot of love, get a lot of attention from this team, and then struggle in these roles, struggle in these positions where you have to succeed, you have to be bringing through these numbers, and he was doing the exact opposite. And he's playing in a fashion in which, he's getting a lot of setup and he's not being able to perform. Meanwhile, you're watching George play. He's getting a lot of setup. He gets a ton of love on this team right now. It's very clear that Nitro's been doing the best work in terms of introducing him to this team and setting him up for success out of the gates. He's been playing unbelievably well. But then you watch him, and the way that he can not only transition his setup to getting kills, but then find ways to help out his teammates to then back up the success is just makes me feel like he's playing that 2025 flowchart Counter-Strike of getting yourself an opening advantage, falling back, finding ways to set up utility for your teammates on those CT sides. He works so well in his very first official with this team. He's worked so well in playing coordinated off the back of each other, just on the fly, quick moves. And that sort of coordination I just think was very clearly missing from automatic. And I'm with you. I'm not sure what that fall off was in between EG and NRG. It wasn't the same player. It wasn't like automatic is trying to pull this team across every matchup that they're playing. That was not the case at all with this team. And in fact, it was a little bit of the opposite, unfortunately, when he's transitioned into this squad. And I definitely think George was the best possible addition that they could have picked up in replacement.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously their first outings have been awesome. I think they did decent at Revival Cup, right, if I'm not mistaken, and they won Launders Land, albeit some setbacks, as far as the VRS stuff is concerned, but they still cruised through that tournament, and they did well at Frag as well. Like, they are really happy with I think I'm sure they're very happy with the state of affairs that they're at right now, and moving forward, I'm very excited to see how things are gonna be for this team, because I think they can actually gun for it against M18 Wildcard. I want to start seeing those bouts happen in these qualifiers, in these late stage kind of tournament situations, and see if they can finally clip them a couple of times, because honestly, moving into the previous season, they were always like nearly there, but there was always some setback. Like OC disappears for a map, or like Hex disappears for a map, or Breeze has a slow one, and they just couldn't actually piece it all together for two maps in a best of three. It would be like one solid map altogether. So I'm hoping that they can piece it together when they do start playing the elite competition. But yeah, I'm kind of putting them at like the top end of Puncher's chance, and saying that they've really got that gear that they can clock into if you give them a little bit more time to just get gelled. Because right now, obviously, the foundation is there. But yeah, I'm super excited about this team. This was one of those roster moves that I was like, that made me want to make this video, to be honest, because it's like, finally, these bigger
there's a
orgs.
misconception too, right?
Right,
Like
exactly.
internationally, there was a massive confusion as to how the modern NRG was playing, right?
Right. And I think in their minds, they were kind of like, oh, NRG is like expected to be playing at these lands, be expected to play these big tournaments, and unfortunately, you can't do that if you can't get past the NA qualifiers and you've got some duds on the team. So that's a little harsh, but but you know what I mean. Energy looks exciting. I'm excited to watch them. I can't wait to see them moving forward. But Legacy is a team that we've been talking about a lot recently, off camera, and honestly, I want to hear everything about it. I'm very excited after hearing what you had to say about this team.
Yeah, so I've been watching them. Me and Five been doing the Frost and Fire event that's been going on in South America, or at least the playoffs of it. Legacy have just been tearing up the competition. It just looks so easy in every game that they play. Lux coming away from Pain, obviously, I think was a big surprise, but Pain, you got to trust Pain when they make a roster move. They're not interested in staying, bad. They bring in David or David Deos, and I mean, what a pickup from Pain, first of all. But understandable that Lux kind of gets replaced in this sense for a player like David, because Lux copping into Legacy now, taking the IGL roles, just barring all of the talk about IGLs and blah 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 blah. Lux has had in the last two officials that he's played already for this team, has had not only the best game that Nigel has ever had on Legacy, with his matchup versus Dusty Roots. To be fair, he just popped off with a 1.91 rating in a best of three. But then he had the second best in a best of three rating that a Legacy IGL has ever had in the matchup before that. So out of the gates with his first two games with this team, he's so much better than what Nekis is able to provide for this roster on an output level. And he's not even like playing in the same roles as Nekis, which were the best roles in the game. Nekis was playing rotations on, he was playing rotator on Anubis. He was playing connector on Mirage. He was getting the most love and playing the most active positions where you just have to be taking these kills, and he was whiffing so bad on like some give me frags. Whereas now
Mhm.
Lux hops into this roster, kind of takes a step back in that department, gives it over to Dumao, which makes a lot of sense, and is still popping off and just taking wins by force. So I think it's the best possible scenario that Legacy could have done, getting rid of kind of an older, not washed up, but I mean, Neck is just he was. I don't think he was cutting it in the calling front, let alone the fragging front, where he was
I'm sure it
massively
affected the
missing.
fragging as well, right? There's no way that
Yeah,
like those two weren't directly correlated.
he's almost 30 years old, whereas the rest of Legacy are all these very young players. They now have an average
Hmm.
age of 22, where Dumao is kind of like a young veteran on this team at this point. Dumao and Lotto, and then Lux is one of the more experienced players when it comes to playing Legacy game, or I mean not Legacy games, prestige matchups and big stadium events. At this point, Lux has that experience. Nissim has that experience for that matter, and playing with high pressure. And just this roster, you couldn't have asked for better moves for the options that you usually have in South America. It's just a perfect target on 2x Pain players, really.
So I'll play the devil's advocate here, and I want to continue to pick your brain on it because I think the biggest question mark for me is how is Lexus calling on the T side, and then how is Nissim after all is said and done? Because he's been out of the game for a little bit. I'm not gonna count Tropo de Taco as a stint, unfortunately, but
Your time on Tropa de Taco does not count.
yeah, exactly. But this guy was also like, I mean, I honestly forgot about him. To be completely honest with you, like after his time on Pain, he just disappeared, basically in contract jail because the loan expired. And now that the contract's expired, now he's back to playing. And how do you see him on this team? Does he have a real right to stay here? It is what who was dropped? It was Barton that
Yeah,
was dropped? Yeah,
Barton got
yeah.
his
And
turn
honestly,
around.
I thought Barton was pretty solid. So, like, for
Yeah,
me, I think he has big shoes to fill.
yeah. I mean, and again, it's not like a direct fill here. Nissim not playing in the same positions as Barton
Uh-huh.
was. Actually, Lotto took over some of the anchoring, so
That's crazy.
keep an eye out for him. Which is
Hmm.
it's an interesting move here. But Nissim's been great, man. He's just been like a soldier. He's very good at getting aggressive. Again, like when I cast them so far, when I've watched what they're doing, they're not playing the toughest competition. So even like calling wise, I can't really get a perfect aspect as to if Lux is doing
Hmm.
good. But it seems like they have a flow chart where they can at least work off of that very well. I mean, so far it has come down to them just completely outgunning their opponents because they're playing Dusty Roots and then Shinden before that. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's like those aren't the best examples of like
Right.
tough competition that's going to fight back. But from what I saw of Lux so far is that he is, being a key facilitator on this T side. Interestingly enough, Dumao's kind of struggling to find as much impact on the T side, but I think that's more on Dumao's end trying to figure out how he now slots into this roster. He's going through a lot of changes as an individual, but this casting later down the line. I'm casting them versus Bestia, so I think that's going to be the most interesting matchup here of this event so far, and that's where I'm going to be keeping a close eye as to whether or not Lux can actually, call around some very good firepower. I think Thomason's going to be a challenge for him individually. So, uh, as for like calling, I don't know if I have a great read on that yet because they just
Yeah.
haven't needed to like get in their bag yet.
Hmm. No, that's completely understandable. I'm very excited to see whether that Lotto experiment works. Because I think that this guy could do a whole lot of damage in more active roles. But obviously, we'll see how that Bestia test goes. I'm actually very excited for that one to see because Noxie in his own right can call up a good storm. So we'll see what he can do against a real test like that. So where do you kind of put this team? kind of see them below NRG, but I think with how you're giving the reviews, it might be higher than them.
Yeah, I would put it in front of NRG at this point.
Uh,
Um, I think they're going to be doing some serious damage. Unfortunately, they're not going to be an NA team anymore, though.
right, yeah.
Like
I
we had
realized
highlighted.
this like midway through the
I
the
mean, it's
video,
okay
but
because I just wanted to
yeah.
get a chance to talk about them anyways. But I think they're going to be better than NRG, and I also think we're going to be seeing them at a lot of stuff this year for sure.
Hopefully, yeah. Let's get into the boss. This is definitely a team that was near and dear to your heart and to my heart as well. But there's been a lot of changes to this team. They've lost Cryptic, they lost their captain, and they've lost another player as well. I'm like blanking. I don't know why. Oh, Darty,
Darty.
obviously. Yeah, yeah. They lost Darty and they've added in Wolf, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about this team altogether. They've added in Snav as the in-game leader. Definitely like completely out of left field. Um, I don't really feel like I've sifted through my feelings about this roster move all too much, but I'll be honest. I think that this team could surprise potentially just off the back of you think about like IGLs that are there in the scene, and you remove the stigma and the story and all that off of the team, and you think about what Snav has done with Timberman and how dysfunctional Timberman looked without him at one point, and how much of a storm that they made once he was back in,
Hmm.
and you've got to give that some sort of credence, and you say, okay, well, who do we really have as an option? And honestly, he is probably the best one to pick up. And now all of a sudden, I'm very curious to see what he does with. Honestly, I think you could say maybe better pieces in some routes. Like I think, I guess you could say Freshy's probably a better soldier in some regards. I think you could say Slight has. No, I don't think I would go that far. I think Dia is probably a better opera than Slight. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think that Fruit Cup could be a better a better entry fragger. That's for sure.
Yeah,
But yeah, I don't know. Beyond that, I don't know. I'm very interested to see what he does with these pieces that are completely like different to what he's played with Timberman for so long. He's gonna have to like undo a lot of habits, and I don't know what he's gonna do in that regard. So, how do you kind of paint the picture with Boss?
I mean, I think you're on the money in terms of talking about Snav. I think if you talk about first things first, like who else they brought in Wolf. I also feel like he's going to fit the culture of the boss squad there. That it feels like makes a lot of sense. And they're very unified. I just can't imagine Snav fitting that culture. He's a bit of a more quiet guy there, though. Like I've been watching him on LAN. It doesn't seem like he's oftentimes the one that's like screaming, yelling. Mostly doing that from Shane and Dare. So like those are the usual guys that are getting loud and um, yelling at the opposition. Whereas Snav is kind of just He always seems super focused. So I think that could be interesting. Frustration or anything like that, though, is going to be a big factor. It's like a whole new environment, whole new team. So how are you going to handle like if you get angry, if you get upset at these players, if someone makes a mistake, is Snav going to have those big breakdown moments where you have to keep your calm? And I'm hoping that Snav kind of adjusts in that. But I mean, you're exactly right when you look at the objective like value that Snav brings to this team. He is a fragging IGL when this roster just lost one, and that is one of the biggest assets that Boss could have picked up. There is the fact that they do immediately get a piece that can shoot and call super efficiently. It'll be a whole new challenge playing with a different core than what he's been playing with for like the last 6 years of his life. Right, this is
Yeah,
a huge difference for Snav
six
in that
years. That's
sense, but.
crazy.
Yeah, since 2019, I mean, he's been playing with this trio. Since I started casting, I've been casting Snav, Dare, and Shane. So that's like a whole new lineup that they have to work through and try and figure out. But I feel like Snav is a great addition. It's a big find for Boss, who have some big shoes to fill, to be honest with you. And I'm glad to see that this roster is still managing to find their way through a situation that I thought would kill them, to be honest. I thought losing a player like Cryptic, who's been such a clear leader for this team and has had the challenges of sticking with this roster, finally going is a big deal. And then Darty's just the same way. This team sees that success, they make it to the RMRs, but then as soon as they get to this point, they end up getting poached. And we kind of felt like we knew it was coming. I was surprised to actually see Cryptic get the opportunity, to be honest with you. Didn't
Hmm.
think he was going to be a player that would ever be poached. I thought he was going to have to make it with this team. Otherwise, it was, like his career trajectory would struggle to move up, but pleasantly surprised to see that at least.
I think initially, like he was actually not gonna go. I don't necessarily know what pulled him to finally pull the trigger, but I'm glad that he did because we'll talk about nouns in a little bit. But I think that move was an awesome one to make. And same for Darty. I think Darty also got a really good opportunity with this TSM squad. Like again, we talk about the roster construction of that organization, and it looks great. It looks great on paper. Why wouldn't you make that kind of a call?
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think my biggest issue for Boss is just the firepower. I think it shoulders a lot onto Slight, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on Wolf, like straight out of the gates, to kind of do something. Because Freshie is going to be that guy that kind of like fills the gaps for you. He's going to be there to kind of pick up the pieces, but you're not relying on him to be like your S plus rifler. Like you just can't do that. So there's gonna have to be new win conditions for this team. Overall, they're gonna have to be a team more so than anything. Like they're gonna have to actually have some foundation to them, and I think that goes on a lot of shoulder onto Snav as well. And honestly, shout out Boss for the one time because we watched them in the open qualifier play against Timmerman, or the close qualifier for a spot at the RMR, and I mean they were like typing a storm against Boss, and the fact that they were like, yeah, we're gonna still put our differences aside, get this
Mhm.
captain, and bring him to our team is actually like really awesome, and I really do hope that it works for everyone, and to just put all this nonsense to rest and kind of put it all behind us. And I hope Boss is still a force within ECL. So I'm kind of like putting them towards like top end of needs work. I think I'd put them like above undone. I don't know about you.
Yeah, yeah, that would do. I mean, either that or Matt, but I could see
Yeah.
needs work because they probably need to work on their stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a natural segue to talk about nouns. Honestly, we'll get back to PA.
Cool.
But I really do love the cryptic move. I think he was easily the best IGL of the crop that wasn't on a salaried team just yet. I think Benleet has some fragging issues still that he has to kind of deal with. I think that obviously Walco was just like removed straight up, so don't think he was playing the game all too much. And then after that, you've got like Brett, and that's like really it. Cryptic was by and large way beyond all of the class, just by how he carries himself as an individual when he frags, as a captain to lead multiple boss iterations to the RMR and compete, not necessarily even just buy out, actually compete at these tournaments, and then also just keep all these cores together for as long as possible. I think that his macro is very solid as well. Ever since that detonate team where they said basically, okay, Cryptic is now going to be our caller. I had very low expectations from him, but ever since that little RMR, the run to the RMR that they didn't actually attend, they've never looked back, and he has
Hmm.
kind of defied the odds in every possible way. And I talked about it at the end of the RMR that I was like, surely we cut Carson and we ask for Cryptic, and usually those dream moves don't necessarily happen in our region, but it finally did, and for that I am like so excited. I don't think Rush was qualified for the in-game leading role, and now we've got like a really good team that's ready for the North American stage.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Rush here is kind of interesting, right? Because I would say it was a logical progression in his career. To step into
Hmm.
the IGL role with his history, with his experience, with his ability to also be such a great support player as well. Like, it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense that he could step into the IGL role. But also, I think it's like wise of him to, identify if that's not his position, if that's not his strength, at least just yet, or if he's not interested in making that transition, to quickly elect to move against that idea and then get someone that we know can do good work in that department. That is Cryptic without question. Now the interesting thing is here for this team, they've got a caller who's finally, I would say, playing with one of the best strategic coaches that he's ever played with. I like Horvey a lot. I like Warden a lot, and Mix was the coach before that for all of the RMRs that Cryptic has made has been working with different coaches in
Hmm.
every single one of them, which is like a crazy accomplishment. And that one factor that was the same was him. He was the IGL of all those teams. So he's now stepping into a roster with a coach like a Drin, who I think is going to be the biggest asset that he has played with, without question. He's dealing with finally a opera who has a little bit of pedigree in the scene, and without question is going to be capable of doing some serious damage. And playing alongside a player like Juniors is a big deal. Peeping has been one of the most exciting players of 2024, breaking into the scene. Every new role that he kind of takes on, he's playing better and better. And I think he's going to be one of the best talents that comes out of 2025 here if he can continue to succeed. So yeah, I just think a really smart decision from Rush, a really mature decision for him to identify that calling was not his strength, and then for them to get that dream move of bringing Cryptic into the mix.
Yeah, I think role wise as well, having him as an aggro rifler still very much works. You've got Infinite now on this team as well, which I think is the biggest question mark. Obviously dropped from wildcard and then kind of just floating around the scene. He was on PA for a little bit, and now I actually think that this is a pretty good team for him. I think you can have a good field player like him who can be very aggressive, but I think he can also be a very solid anchor for you as well. I've seen him do some really good work on that CT side. So honestly, I think it's all about mentality for him and how he slots in with this team and with the culture that's here. And if he does, I think that they'll be very happy with having him for a while. Obviously, there's so many issues that are beyond Nouns' control at this point with the org. I think that their initial proposal has failed, but they will be reapplying for a smaller budget. That does mean that they likely won't have as many EU boot camps, but if they do qualify, I'm sure the org can back them to at least send them to these boot camps at least once
Mhm.
they qualify for events. But at the very least now, I would like just Cryptic and Adren to stay together as long as possible. Just because I think that Cryptic is a very important piece in the whole North American puzzle when we look towards developing talent, developing an IGL for the future to lead a primo squad. Once, inevitably Nitro's got to retire, and we've got to look towards other answers and keep American teams alive. Maybe if JT moves on to greener pastures, I'm looking at these kind of premier organizations. You need somebody to kind of fill that stopgap, and Cryptic is that player. And I'd like him from to learn as much from basically our wisest coach that we have in the region for as
Mhm.
long as possible. So I hope that even if these organizational things kind of fall apart, that those two stick together and try to kind of write it out, because I think there's a lot of really good there that can come from that. And
Yeah, I mean that's the part that stinks though. Cryptic's been without an organization for as long as he's played the game. He hasn't had
right,
an organization that's paid him a salary. Dren's not in that same boat, right?
right,
It's
right,
it's a little bit
exactly.
of a
Yeah.
different story. He's got bills to pay, and I mean everybody does, but it's a different story. And that's my big question: is how does this second proposal work? I hope that they get the budget down.
Hmm.
I hope that there's a support because Nouns have done such a good job in identifying how they level up their talent, how they get to that next step, which is
Yeah.
obviously qualifying for the major. That's their goal. It's always mentioned in terms of like the reason as to why they're playing the game, or like kind of supporting this. One of the biggest reasons is that sticker money and the opportunity for payback from all of these investors. But if you're talking about finally seeing the changes from a roster that's been sticking with Carson and CJ, who I think are good pieces for so long, if you want to raise that ceiling, you got to get this IGL that can do damage. And you finally have that piece. It would be so sad to see Nouns finally give up on what they've been working on for so long.
Yeah, 100%. I do really like how they've approached the that fifth slot very well. I mean, taking a chance on Nick was like, I thought it was a risk. I still thought that he hadn't proved himself yet. I thought that lag experiment was very much the OG Wizard show. I hadn't seen enough from any of the riflers yet that I was like, okay, this is a very clear guy. I would pick and choose and kind of bring him up. The fact that that worked as well as he did, and now he's on complexity, is insane. And we'll get into that conversation after the PA stuff. But I'm very happy with how Adren has gone about this. He's not recycled old talent. He's really like gotten into his bag and really like scouted out some good players. And I think you've got a really good team now. And I hope that we get to see a lot of them. I kind of put them at the bottom end of Puncher's Chance just because they've still got to work out kind of how to work under Cryptic at this point, and obviously there's still a lot of question marks as to whether or not this team kind of stays together beyond the first bit of the season.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, maybe that's a little bit of my bias showing, but I feel like this roster has a lot of potential.
Yeah. Well, PA, very weird situation with PA. I feel like it's a bit of a ship of Theseus at this point, where like I can't even recognize this roster at this point. There was one point where I was like, oh my god, like this team should be like this team made all the slam dunk moves that they needed to. They're gonna start like climbing through the ranks. They actually got some good wins to like start out the second half of 2024, but everything has fallen apart for them. They've lost Sixy. They've lost who Darty or not Darty.
Peeping.
Yeah, Peeping. Right. Yeah. After that worked very well. They've lost so many different players, so many different coaches as well. They had Sixy at one point, and now you're looking at this team and you're wondering, is Viz really the answer? Is Viz the answer? And who is their fifth? We don't even know who their fifth is just yet. And I'm just wondering, like, can we get Fang out of this team? That's kind of how I see this roster all of a sudden. And that sucks because I really like Ben Leet, and I think OG Wizard has capabilities of being a good opera, but he's just not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel for this team. They have to go back to some comfort here. They have to bring back Viz. They lost Peeping, who I think was one of the biggest or toughest losses, very quickly. They were not able to hold on to Peeping at all. He got plucked as soon as possible away to Nouns, and then Nouns are like, "Hey, I'll take Infinite too while we're at it." But just a shame in terms of that sense. They can't really hold on to these pieces because they're really good. They show these results. Whereas Boss, I think, are very good at like doing a lot with pieces that maybe aren't as impressive and don't pop off the screen as much. When you have Peeping consistently outperforming players like Fang on this OG or on this Party Astronauts roster, he's not going to last long. He's not going to stay on without a salary for very long. So Party Astronauts kind of struggled in that department. And yeah, I mean, the build of this team here, going back to Viz, is fine. They've got to figure out a way to fill in these positions. And I think Viz is a player that Ben Leet is super comfortable with. So you already got that cohesion. You don't need a lot of slotting in for them. So that's obviously good news. But yeah, the fifth slot's still up in the air. And, how is Party Astronauts going to deal with these constant inconsistencies? Whereas every other roster is kind of stabilizing on the North American scene with organizations coming in. Party Astronauts still don't have that luxury.
Yeah, I'm like looking towards like potential answers. Like I look towards maybe you make a calling change and you bring in Brett, or maybe you try to get Slump somehow. And again, these don't like they're not perfect fits because you've already gotten some of those issues like solved. Then maybe you have to look towards like who's remaining for the Timberman core. Do you want to take a chance on any of those players? That's a whole nother can of worms that I don't know if they want to open, because I think that's a very conflict averse team. They're a very like band of merry men is kind of how I would see them. Like I don't think they really have much like conflict within the team. They're all just very functional together. And I don't think that they want to kind of have that potentially go up in the air. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, honestly, at this point, I would probably like even just move up Boss to like meh and like PA to like needs work above undone. Because there's nothing that like really excites me about this team anymore. Like even OG, like I want him to do so much work, but I think he's just very average on this team.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a hard like step into the light for OG Wizard. He has some really good moments, and I think he has a switch that he can flip where it's like, okay, I've had 4 kills in a map, but then you can watch him take over games, and you're like, if he can just get that sort of consistent factor, this guy could be a whole different player. But there's still a lot of room for that to grow as well. If you're having a player that has those capabilities, it's all about being able to bring it out consistently. And maybe that's not something that he can bring out just yet, but with time, as a young player, I think he can bring it out long term. And yeah, party astronauts are just in a disappointing spot, and I'm with you. Unfortunately, my take on this is I can't believe Fang is actually still kicking with
Yeah.
this squad, right? I mean, with all of the changes that we've seen in the scene, how is Fang still not signed to an organization? Fang's 22 years old, so we have not seen the peak of this guy at all. I don't think, and maybe it's like the work that was done on complexity and NRG didn't impress enough, sure, but he's been spending some time playing in rosters where he's been given a lot of love and respect, and he's been performing consistently. So my question is, when does he leave this roster? Is kind of the state I kind of find party astronauts in.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I saw with him is that I feel like people are considering the time that he had in the RMR run to be how his level is, but after 60 left, there were very clearly like a role overlap between Fang and 60.
Yeah,
And once 60 left, like that's where Fang had all the kind of control and the resources that he could ask for, and he actually did stuff with it. Like
yeah,
he was putting the numbers out that he needed to get a call up, but it just never happened. Like I'm curious, like if I could potentially have Fang for Marky on TSM, like that's a kind of like I think it's like a 50-50, like who I would take on the day, but maybe if that doesn't work, you could look towards that. I don't know, like maybe an NRG if they ever want to like make a call there, if they want to move on from, I don't know, a Breezy or something. But even then, it would roll overlap with George, so it's tough. Like you can't necessarily like shoehorn him into like any of these premier teams, but he's got to get a call up to an org at some point. Is the hope? Because yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't think I've seen the highest of highs with him just yet. I refuse to believe that that extra salt MVP is everything that he can do, because that was not all that he could show, to be completely honest. So yeah, we'll see how PA works out, but it's the big fish. We got to talk about the big fish of complexity now, because this is what everyone's talking about. Everybody has, honestly, I think everybody has problems with this roster. I think EU are very low on this team. I think they have every right to, if especially if you're not watching Counter Strike in the North American level. Where do we see complexity after the dust is settled?
So I mean, complexity is it was kind of a surprise. I didn't know which direction that they were going to take in terms of. I probably should have known which direction they were going to take, given all that Jason Lake has said. Um, but taking the step in more so like developing in a talent here, and bringing in some unknown quantities on an international stage. I mean, people still don't really know who 60 is, let alone Nick X, who broke onto the scene very recently with, I would say, like Nouns in his trial there. He didn't even get signed to
Yeah.
Nouns. He was on trial for a little bit. But I mean, it is all big shoes to fill when you hop in for a Liege. I just think this roster is simply put going to be stepping in a direction backwards instead of heading forwards with this roster iteration. I mean, I have a lot of faith that 60 and Nick X can pick up the pieces nicely and still be able to perform at a level that NA provides. But you lost a Liege who's very clearly like such a devastating hit, and you bring in a player like 60 who can break those molds. We highlighted like this guy can really take over games, and I think the biggest asset about 60 is no matter what the game is, he plays the same. He's still. It doesn't matter if he's playing up against the best teams in the world or if he's playing up against NA rosters that he knows he can stomp. He's still playing with the confidence that's necessary to survive and thrive. So that's like I think one of the best options that Complexity could pick up. Now, as for Nick X, I've been really, really impressed with what he's been able to do with Nouns. I've watched him at his peak play with Nouns with those revival cups. and consistently do damage. Like, I mean, looks like the best player on the server fairly consistently out of the gates, and a couple of these T side halves that he just performs unbelievably well. Didn't expect that at all, to be honest with you, when he's having this amount of impact on the T side. But also, that's a very small sample size. And it's a big task to join Complexity with the expectations that Complexity have on the international scene. And people are going to have lingering expectations from this team as well. You know, this was a roster at one point that had a liege. It's not the same roster anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think people have to temper their expectations when it comes down to this roster. I'm going to do the same thing, and give them a lot of grace. But this is a team that is definitely going to look to try and avoid as much regression as possible. But that's a very difficult task here, I think.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue was people saying that they didn't go EU. They didn't try to poach any talent from Europe. And look, I think it works for a lot of teams, but I think you've really got to give credit to Jason Lake to kind of stay the course and say that we want to be America's team and we want to stay around and look towards talent like that. And I've got to give major credit to the organization to stay the course, because it's very easy at this point to kind of jump ship and say, let's just pull a liquid. Let's just pull a liquid and just go full EU and keep like just a couple of
Oh,
NA
wild
players to.
card, pull it
Yeah,
M80.
yeah. There's so many options, right? That you can see. Look at the success is there. We could totally do it, but they chose not to. And I really want this team to succeed so badly, just because. Yeah, as you said, Nick is a great player. Sixy also fantastic in his own regard. I want them to. I want these players to show that there is still hope in North America. There's still talent to be had. There's still things to be shown. That is very exciting. That have the same like kind of philosophy of like North American CS from like 2019. Like you think about like Liquid in the Grand Slam era, it's like it's five fraggers that just knew how to shoot. You know, you had a solid IGL, you had some decent calls here and there, but at the end of the day, it was the most North American team that North America could produce, and I want to see more of that being developed, and it has to start somewhere. And I think players like Sixy have that gear to take to get to the next level, and I'm very curious to see how they do. Yes, I think guaranteed there is regression there. Like honestly, I would put them maybe even like behind M80 in a lot of ways, because you've got to have Sixy and Nick reach that level all of a sudden at the highest of tournaments in the toughest of situations, and that's going to be a tough ask. Like, what their first outing is Blast Bounty, and then they're gonna have to go into Kato. Like, these guys were playing like Revival Cups not too long ago, so like
Yeah.
it's going to be a really tough ask. But we've seen it. We've seen the flip switched before. We've looked at like you look at Lake, right? Like he had a bad tournament at EWC. It was a tough situation, but he had a great series against the Complexity at that time. And then after that, he didn't look back. He still had so much impact. He still had so much of a bounce back. And I hope to see any sort of a level like that from some of these players moving forward. And we'll see what they can do. But yeah, honestly, I think my biggest question mark for me is how is Nick going to do now that he has to play in this environment? Because as you said, he basically just trialed on Nouns. I've not seen enough of a sample size yet to say, okay, yeah, he is really that kind of person. And the other issue was I was hearing a lot of role overlap. I was getting told that Nick and Sixy play very similar roles, and now Nick has to play some floppy roles, which I don't know how he's going to fare in that. So yeah, I think that's like another issue is as how do these guys mold in new situations.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was also hearing some rumors about. I think at one point Nick X jokingly had his name as IGL or whatever for
Jeez.
complexity as like a joke on his, ban or bio. I don't think
Yeah.
he's gonna be the IGL of complexity. I can confidently say. So,
I really hope so.
so just to squash that, but yeah, I mean, for the side of Nick X, I was super impressed, man. He really did great work with Nouns
Hmm.
out of the gates, and it was all when Jason Lake was watching, man. I jokingly put this tweet out, but like
Yeah.
it wasn't as much of a joke because when I'm covering those revival cups when I'm casting him, uh, he was popping off like nobody's business, and
Hmm.
you see Jason Lake, watch all of these events. He's always there, retweeting the tweets and stuff like that. So he's involved in that, and for that to be the case, and for him to kind of get rewarded, it just shows the amount of investment that Jason Lake really is putting into the scene. I got to give him a lot of respect because not only is he running events in the NA scene, but he's then running events that lead to him picking up players that develop talent in the region. So I got to give him a lot of credit there in that department. It's going to be pretty electric. It's going to be electric to find out whether or not Nick X can keep it up because, as I highlighted, small sample size, but the guy was very good when I was watching him.
Yeah, I'm very pumped to see how it all pans out. They've got those new jerseys as well. Cool
Yeah,
ass jerseys, cool ass
old school
logo. So
logos.
yeah, so I'm pumped to see what Complexity has on offer. But last two teams for you, I think I kind of like pair them in the same area. I just wanted to put these two teams there because they basically have dead rosters. And so naturally we'd put them in DOA. But the Timberman core, I feel like this is the end. I don't necessarily know if any of these players can go anywhere. I think Dare
Yeah.
was the only real piece that I would think about, but like Shane is not necessarily.
I think Shane is pretty much not calling it quits on the career, but as far as I know, and this I think John actually mentioned this, but he was talking about how Shane was interested in, focusing a little bit more on his job and sorting that out. So uh, I think this is going to be at least a team if they stick together with Shane and Dare that they play at lands and stuff like that. But I really
Yeah.
don't know about if this team is at all going to be a roster long term, and not only not a roster, but like a couple of these guys might be not necessarily on the outs in terms of playing CS competitively, but will be on the outs in terms of top notch like all in investment from these guys.
Right, yeah. I do still feel like I wish we could have seen more from Dare as a player. I
Yeah.
thought he had some really high highs as an opper. He had some decent highs as a rifler, and I think that he could have been a valuable piece. But unfortunately, it's just like, the way the cookie crumbles with the mentality and things like that. So that's just unfortunate. I just wanted a little bit of a eulogy for this team because, yes, it sucks that this team is dead, and I think a lot of people are happy in a lot of ways that this team is dead, for
It's not the
better or for
worst
worse.
thing.
Yeah, but I still do think that if you remove that aspect of them, that there was a lot of really good things that I hoped would have improved as these guys got older and hopefully more mature. And obviously, as we've spoken about before, you do have Snav on Boss now, and you do have Dia potentially on that TSM team. And I hope that, and obviously Peeping, that's had a meteoric rise as well. So I do hope that these remnants kind of sprinkled through are improved upon on their respective teams moving forward. But yeah, I guess the last team is Fluffy Aimers that is
Oh,
also kind of like.
I
Oh yeah,
wanted to
go ahead.
mention something real quick. Wildcard did end up closing out the Frost and Fire Season 1 of European
Let's go.
region. So NA owns EU in the first season of Frost and Fire. 100% win
Oh,
rate so far for the
never
Americas region
lost.
because we're also taking South America too while we're at it. So
Yes, yes. Awesome. Well, that's great news. Fluffy Aimers was the last little eulogy that I had for the video, and honestly, it sucks because I actually really like the core of this team. I like Slump a lot. I love that he went to frag and he proved a lot of people wrong. Dumpster on a couple of people in a couple of series, which was really cool. Brett, I finally got to hear from him in some NA to Z interview coverage. By the way, subscribe to that channel. Really good coverage from Eminem's Jeff, and
hmm
just hearing the perspective of some of these players and how hungry they are and how willing they are to kind of prove a lot of doubters wrong is really impressive to me. And it really sucks that we have to put an end, at least temporarily, to the Brett captaincy story and the slump opping story as well for the time being. And I think these two guys could be very valuable to certain teams moving forward. And I just hope that we get to see more of them, whether or not it's together as a core or if they're separated to different kind of pastures.
I mean, for me, I think this roster definitely feeling dead, right? But
Yeah.
you also, like you said, I think Brett's a serious competitor, and if you look at Fluffy Aimers over the years, over the year that they've been working together, and over the year that they really been impressing. I would say at the second part of 2024 is when I really started to pay more attention to them.
Yeah.
Um, they went through so many different roster changes. They have not kept, a consistent team, whether that's playing with stand-ins, whatever the case is. They have had to go through a lot of different changes there between the core of like Jason, Brett, and kind of News even was in
Oh,
and
right.
out here and there. So I do think there's a lot of potential for this roster to build and make moves. I hope that they can maybe get News back. I know he's been off and on player, but if they can get him back, he's very solid piece of this puzzle, and you can actually have some sort of consistency because I like Brett as an IGL. I really like him as a leader, and I feel like as a player who's worked with Cryptic for quite some time in his career, and I feel like I see a lot of the same style of those two individuals, and Brett's a player that can also perform and hit some shots while he's at it. So that sort of capability makes me hopeful that there's some sort of rebuild in the future for the side of Fluffy Aimers, and they can still kick it with an ECL caliber team. But obviously they've gone through so many changes and so much adversity that it'd be hard pressed to keep that motivation, right?
Yeah, and then you have like the org falling apart as well, which like was like the kind of last ditch effort to keep them all together. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, I hope to see more of Fluffy Amers. That's gonna do it.
Fluffy Aimers was the glue that held the fur together.
That's wow, that was awesome. Is this writing fire? Is what all the streets are saying, I think, at this point. But that's gonna do it. We've got the tier list done with. I'm very excited for North America moving forward to this year, and I hope that my international audience on this channel kind of sees this video, and I'll put timestamps and stuff in case you want to like see where all these teams are put on this list, and kind of take North America with a grain of salt moving forward, and like really give them the time of day, because I've seen a lot of this CS over last year, and there is still some very exciting things to look forward to in this region. And yeah, definitely keep an eye out for a lot of these teams to start to make a couple of waves. Of course, we also have to see how the ranking stuff shapes out with a region with less kind of events going on. But of course, we'll all have to see how the cookie crumbles. Of course, follow Xner on Twitter. Was it XnerCast, right?
That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one. And then, yeah, we will see you guys very shortly. And hope you guys enjoy the start of the season. So take care.